Slimesicle is someone that you wouldn't think has any drama around his name. Although I've been critical of the guy in the past, regardless of my opinion, he has a pretty good reputation. He's just a guy that does his own thing in his videos and doesn't really get himself involved in anything scandalous. But that seems to have changed a bit recently, albeit for some really dumb reasons. There's this situation about his Twitch mods and them being quote-unquote fired, which I found interesting. Not because Slime actually did anything wrong, but because it's so funny that people would actually get mad about this. But it got me thinking, what else has Slime done to get people mad at him? So that's what this video is about. The stuff I'm talking about will range from as early as 2021 all the way to this year, and hopefully we can figure out why exactly people have an issue with him. So with all that out of the way, subscribe to the channel if you like videos like this one, and let's find out what actually happened to Slimesicle. Now, this is the first situation to get any sort of major criticism to come towards Slime's way, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know exactly what I'm about to say in this section. But for those who don't know what I'm referring to, let me give some context here. In January of 2021, the YouTuber Call Me Carson was outed for sexting a 17-year-old fan when he was 19, and this would cause most of his friends, especially the members of his group channel Lunch Club, to cut ties publicly. I have some very strong opinions about this situation myself, but I'm gonna leave them out of this section. They're not really relevant and would not really add to my point here, but what I will talk about is Slime's involvement in this entire thing. On January 5th of the same year, he released a statement about Carson, where he alleges that in early 2020, Carson told him, the rest of the Lunch Club members, and their manager about the 17-19 situation. And due to this, Slime decided to cut ties with Carson, leave Lunch Club, and report the information to federal law enforcement. Now, on the surface, there isn't anything inherently wrong with this statement. He felt that a crime was being committed, so he disassociated with Carson and reported him. That would seem to be the right thing to do in a situation like this. But it only takes a few minutes of research for aspects of the statement to seem pretty sketchy at best and downright lies at worst. Let's talk about the time frame here that Slime mentions, early 2020. He doesn't mention a specific month as to when he was told about everything, but thanks to J-Slat's statement on the Weekly Slap, we have some more answers as to when this happened. And that's between late February and early March. So if we assume that this is when Slime actually reported Carson, a ton of issues come to the surface. I'll start with the most minor point first that could easily be brushed off. He still followed Carson on Twitter after he found this out. I understand that a follow doesn't equal an endorsement, and I followed people before that I didn't like. It happens. But considering that he apparently reported Carson to federal law enforcement and didn't want to associate with him publicly, the follow seems strange to me. Here's where the real issues come in though. Slimesicle kept associating with Carson past the February-March time. We'll start with Twitter again. Him and Carson kept interacting until about late June of 2020. Not only that, but he was in Carson's Jackbox Twitch streams a month earlier, and Slime even featured in his game show video, which was also filmed in June. So what exactly does this mean? Well, Slimesicle most likely lied, but to what extent is something we don't know. He definitely wasn't telling the truth about immediately cutting off Carson, we know that for a fact, and what we also know is that he either lied about the time period of the report or the report happening in the first place. And I'll let you decide that for yourself, but there's too many holes in Slime's statement for me to see him as a reliable narrator in the situation. What I see in this statement is Slime realizing that his former associate is being outed publicly and trying to save his own skin. The fact that he felt the need to lie about this makes me not trust whatever he had to say, and makes me think that he may have had malicious motives. I'll never know this for sure, obviously, because I don't know Slimesicle personally, and I never will. But I just wish he was honest about everything. Overall, regardless of what you think about the Carson situation, you have to admit that Slime could have handled this better. His statement completely contradicts what we saw publicly. That's a big issue. And even if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he didn't want to cause drama at the time, that would mean that he still lied. There's no way around that. And all I hope is that if Slime has to deal with more controversies similar to this, he handles it in a way better way in the future. So yeah, with this section starting off the video, you might think that this will be mostly critical of Slime, but I don't want to cause people to get some sort of whiplash when I get to my next section. What if I told you that most of this video will actually be defending him? Stay tuned for that. This section is going to be pretty short, as there's not a lot to talk about here, but I thought it would be pretty important to mention, as this is the first time I saw a moderate amount of backlash going towards Slimesicle. Now, you might see the title of this section, Marble Sponsorship, and might be wondering, did people actually have an issue with this? Well, yes, but it's important that I give some context. At this time, there was this character that Marvel was pushing that was allegedly being used to push out Israel propaganda. I say allegedly because I have not really researched this, and I'm not trying to put politics in this video, but it was important to mention. And because of this, people were trying to boycott Marvel. But Slimesicle, around the same time of this boycott, accepted money to do a Marvel Snap ad on Twitter. So he got a lot of pushback for this. That's about it. That's the entirety of the drama explained. If you expected more to come from this, you'd be sorely mistaken. Slime himself just ignored the comments and moved on with his career, which is the right move. You can't please everyone on the internet, and trying to would be worthless, so good on him, but the whole thing was so dumb that it was barely worth mentioning. Can I just say that some of the stuff that people choose to be mad at seem really performative to me? It doesn't seem like they actually care about what they preach and just want somebody to get mad at. Let's look at this in the grand scheme of things. Marvel is one of the biggest entertainment properties to ever exist, and Marvel Snap itself is a big mobile game. I do not give a fuck that Slime promoted this, and quite frankly, Marvel wouldn't be losing that much money if he didn't do the sponsorship. Plus, anyone that's really mad about this probably still loves Spider-Man, might have played Marvel Rivals, and has used many other products from other companies that are supposedly pro-Israel. Do whatever you want, but maybe don't bash a guy for simply accepting a sponsorship opportunity. Sponsorships are one of the main ways that YouTubers make money, and I think that unless Slime is promoting a scam, misleading his audience, or promoting an actually harmful product, I don't think that something like this is really worth it to talk about. This whole controversy is a complete nothing burger, and quite frankly, I am wasting time that I could be spending on other controversies. So I'm gonna conclude this section here. Moving on. This is the most recent controversy with Slimesicle that I'm going to mention in this video. In fact, out of all the situations I've mentioned in this video, this one is probably the one that people have heard the most about, and it's also the one that I have the most to say about, because I really wonder if people just love to be mad at things. But before we get into it, I want to quickly mention something that Slime did around this time that I thought was pretty funny. He released this video on this VOD channel called I Tricked All of You, where he revealed that for the past few months, he hadn't been live streaming. That's nothing to note in itself, but there were still uploads on this VOD channel, so how could this be? Well, apparently he was just recording his gaming sessions and acting like he was streaming them. He never actually went live. I gotta give Slime props for this. Probably the funniest thing I've seen him do, and it also gives him an extra bit of ad revenue for little effort on his end, so I respect it. He also had this insane character in his video announcing this. I think he just realized how people would perceive him doing this sort of thing, so he decided to just fully embrace it and have this crazy thing. And it definitely fit what he was talking about, I'll say that. He ended up going live for the first time in a while about a day later, and usually this is where something like this would end. I wouldn't have any reason to talk about this, in fact. It would be pointless. But some controversy would start to spread, specifically because of what happened with his Twitch mods. On April 10th, an account with the name Slime Mods announced that Slimesicle completely dropped his mod team, and other former mods of his also started to make tweets, claiming that he was awful at communicating and added his friends as mods instead of the team he had before. This started this short-lived drama where people were pretty mad at Slime for this, and started to dig up any little situation they could from the past. But if you want to know my opinion about this, it's that this is one of the dumbest situations I've ever had the displeasure of covering. If we look over this, all that happened is that Slime quote-unquote fired some Twitch mods. There is no reason to care about this, and I feel like people that do probably use the internet way too much. I would think a bit differently if these people were, you know, actually paid for what they were doing. Randomly dropping his entire team would be way worse in that circumstance, since these are people's jobs that you'd be messing with. There should be more communication. But none of these people were paid. His entire team were just volunteers that were there for free, so I don't really care, to be honest. I've seen the argument that people who are spending hours and hours of their time to moderate a Twitch chat for free should be communicated with better. And I can agree with that to an extent, but I also don't think it's something to make that big of a fuss over. This is a Twitch chat we're talking about at the end of the day. Something where your job is to moderate a community. If I was doing that for free, I wouldn't really care that much if I was kicked off. I would think that sucks and then move on with my day. And that's how everyone should treat this. It sucks, but move on. Slime is not a bad person for this. He might be a dick, but that's the worst you can say about him regarding this. And that's about all I have to say for this section. Moving on. After the Twitch mod situation got people talking, some old situations were dug up to make Slimesicle look even worse, and give people a new excuse to hate the guy. Mostly everything that was brought up isn't really all that important, and nobody really cares about them, which isn't too shocking, but there was one situation that ended up sticking, and that brings us to Jinx, who is the supposed girlfriend of Slimesicle. She's been under a lot of controversy for a few reasons, but the main one is that she was following a Twitter account that drew NSFW content of Slime and others, with that same account also drawing and supporting some pretty fucked up stuff. This is obviously very weird in itself, and her statement defending herself from it wasn't very good and provided more questions than answers. She's most likely a freak, and I can't exactly disagree with this. I probably wouldn't personally associate with someone who liked the things that the account did, but the interesting thing to me is that people went to such high lengths to associate Slimesicle himself with this whole thing. This might be where this video becomes controversial, but I don't think that Slime should have been roped into this as much as he was. How people found out they were even dating in the first place is by finding close friend stories on Instagram that were leaked. This is a completely private relationship. We know nothing about them, and there could have been conversations about the weird behavior behind the scenes. We will never know, and that's not for us to know. If Slime also engaged in this behavior himself, I would get the backlash a little bit, but we've seen no evidence of this, so that argument gets thrown out of the window. I'd also understand if he was actively defending her publicly and getting himself involved, but he isn't. Hell, he hasn't said a single thing publicly about this to my knowledge. The most he could criticize him for is not being the best judge of character when it comes to his relationships. That's a completely fair criticism, but anything further than that would just be speculation. Now, that's not me saying to not criticize Jinx, by the way, but make her actions the main focus, and not the fact that she has a YouTuber boyfriend who's still dating her. That's all I'd ask, really. I'd rather get mad at someone for something they actually did rather than the actions of others. You're free to disagree with me. This is probably the shakiest section of my video, but that's how I personally feel about it. The last point I want to talk about with Jinx is this post here. This person accuses her of pinning suggestive images of her boyfriend from some unhinged artist, but these images literally just look like a white guy with messy hair and glasses. Do you know how many of those exist? Plus, she said she was trying to look for pictures that looked like the Riddler, and that's exactly what those look like. There's legitimate things to criticize her for, sure, but this is just grasping at straws. But that's about it for this section. Moving on. Throughout my time browsing the YouTube platform over the past few years, something I've noticed is how prevalent group channels have become on the site. Groups such as the Sidemen, Beta Squad, FaZe, and many others were at one point at the top of YouTube, gaining millions of views per upload, and developing loyal audiences that would watch just about everyone in the group and anything they did. But over time, many of these channels would start to completely die out, with people completely moving on from what these YouTubers were doing, such as the case with FaZe Clan. And some other channels would completely collapse on themselves due to private drama that broke up the entire group, such as Team Crafted and Lunch Club. But the case we're talking about today, with the channel Misfits, is much more disgusting than that. If anyone's been paying attention, you might have noticed that this group channel has been pretty much inactive since the beginning of 2023. You might assume that it could just be something normal, like creative differences that drove the group apart, but that is far from the case. This video is the story of the Misfits' former manager, Ryan P., and how he misused his position in the group and the content scene in general to do some pretty indefensible things, causing the entire group to collapse in the process. So with that out of the way, join my Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want more content like this, and let's get right into the video. Now, this section will mainly be explaining how Ryan P took advantage of his position in the Misfits to do some pretty bad things, to say the least. But before I get into that, I feel like it's important to get into some brief backstory about the Misfits themselves, just so we can understand how Ryan got into this position in the first place. Although, just a short disclaimer, I'm not going to be going as in depth as I did with the Lunch Club video, simply because this video isn't supposed to be a deep dive or anything. So let's get into it. The Misfits are a content group that spawned from a couple of CSGO YouTubers who were all seemingly in the same friend group, and made videos with each other. The members of the group consisted of Fitz, Swagger Souls, Toby on the Telly, McCreamy, Zuckles, and iNotorious. And they were mostly known for doing the funny moments type of videos whenever it came to CSGO. But that type of content is not at all what they did on the group channel. It was completely different. The videos on the Misfits channel itself were seemingly random and didn't really stick to doing one type of content. It was just whatever they wanted. You could have a camping video to trying out stand-up comedy to causing a riot for some reason. It didn't really matter what type of video it was. They could just make what they want if they thought it was funny. Coupled with a podcast and other business ventures, the Misfits as a group were pretty successful for a while, gaining millions of fans in the time that they were on the platform. There didn't seem to be much reason for the group to fall apart anytime soon, but little did people know that behind the scenes, there were some pretty shady things going on, to say the least. So now that we have this backstory as to what Misfits is and how the YouTube group came to popularity, I think it's finally time we talk about Ryan P. As I've already mentioned before in this section, Ryan was the Misfits manager, and due to him being the manager of such a big YouTube group, he used his power there in some pretty nefarious ways, to say the least. There's some stuff that he did regarding a merch scandal as well with a company that he was running, but but since this video is mainly focusing on the Misfits, I won't be talking about that specifically, and I'd recommend you to watch CoffeeZilla's video if you want to know about that. Instead, I'm going to be covering the many allegations that have come out against Ryan P, most of which seemingly happened because of his role as the Misfits manager. So let's get into it. The first allegation that came out was made by the Twitter user Peckett on November 26, 2022, and I'll read out the first half of their statement here for context purposes so that everyone can get the gist of what I'm talking about here. So here's what's in the post. Throughout my time working with the Misfits and their merch company, I was continually put into extremely uncomfortable situations with Ryan and made to partake in sexual acts which I could only ever agree to after being coerced, told I would get to live with my friends, taken on overseas trips, or made a money offer I wasn't in the position to refuse as I was underpaid and never paid on time. I've witnessed him perv on his employees in the shower, break into clients' phones to search for private photos, take advantage of men who he has given way too much alcohol and drugs. He uses his money and influence to manipulate vulnerable people into fulfilling his sexual desires. So let's sum up what we've heard here. According to Peckett, Ryan allegedly uses a position in the Misfits to take advantage of people in a sexual way. This is a pretty concerning thing if true, but there's just one issue with this at the time: lack of evidence. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that Peckett is lying, and knowing what was revealed later on, they were most likely telling the truth. But if we just look at this in a vacuum to when this was released in late 2022, there wasn't much at the time that backed up their statements. Peckett never provided anything to prove their claims back when their initial tweet about the situation came out, and there wasn't really a trend of similar allegations coming out against Ryan yet at the time. I feel like something could have actually been done about this guy way earlier if there was some evidence attached here instead of just testimony, because as much as I want to be sympathetic here, the truth is that word of mouth is never going to be enough to go off of. You have to have at least something, but that's just me speaking in hindsight, knowing what would come out after the fact. Over the next few months after this came out, the Misfits YouTube group would go almost completely inactive, with the last upload on their main channel being on February 8th, 2023, meaning that they've been completely inactive for over a year now, and it wasn't exactly clear why the group stopped making content up until October of 2023. Several more allegations came out against Ryan, with very similar behavior to the Peckett story that we just covered, along with the fact that fellow Misfits members Fitz and Swagger Souls liked the tweets containing the allegations against Ryan, instantly giving us more credibility than it had before. After these stories came out, Ryan would deactivate his Twitter account and completely disappear from the public eye, making himself look way guiltier than before. To be fair to Ryan here, there wasn't a lot of hard-hitting evidence at the time that he did this stuff, but the fact that there were 3 independent allegations against him and that he deactivated his account after the ones we just talked about, yeah, things weren't looking too good here, and things would only get worse when CoffeeZilla came into the picture. I'm just realizing while scripting this that this is my 3rd video where CoffeeZilla is a major player here. That's kind of funny to me. Now back to the video. CoffeeZilla would end up getting involved in the story due to the merch company Revolt that Ryan was running, but what he found halfway through investigating was everything I've discussed in this video, plus more. Now, I can't include everything that Coffee put into his video, as I would just essentially be stealing the work that he did for his story. I'll leave a link to his video in the description as well for anyone curious about this whole thing, but for now, I'll summarize exactly what he found here. Through this video, Coffee found actual evidence of Ryan abusing his power as the Misfits manager, through certain DMs on sites like Twitter, PayPal receipts, and more people messaging him with their experiences privately. So I think we could say for the most part that Ryan is likely guilty of most of what he's accused of. I think the fact that someone like this was running such a big YouTuber group does make me feel a bit uneasy, and while him being outed doesn't change what happened in the past, at least Ryan isn't in such a high position of power anymore. Now, this would normally be the end of a video like this. Ryan abused his power as a manager of Misfits and was eventually outed, and is no longer in the industry. This seems like a closed book, honestly, but there's something we haven't looked at yet, which is the Misfits members themselves. How much did they know about what Ryan was doing? Something that I wanted to address throughout this video before I conclude everything is the Misfits as a group, and what everybody knew about Ryan's actions before they got outed publicly. But before I begin this section, I want to give a quick disclaimer. Everything that I talk about here is purely based on my own speculation, and this section has the potential to be the most poorly aged thing about this video as time passes. The story still has the potential to change, and more things might be revealed about the whole thing after this point, so I'd recommend taking this section with a grain of salt, and keep in mind that most of this isn't necessarily based on hard-hitting evidence. But anyways, I've seen people wondering what exactly the Misfits members knew about what Ryan was doing behind the scenes. If you go to YouTube and look at the comment section of the most recent Misfits video, most of the comments comments are about the recent Ryan stuff, and about how the members probably knew what was happening behind the scenes. This might just be me assuming good faith in people, but in my opinion, I don't think that anyone in the group had knowledge of most of this stuff going on regarding Ryan. Or if they did have any knowledge of it, they probably didn't know the full extent of what exactly he did. And I have a few reasons for this that I'll go over here. First off, let's look at the timeline of events for everything. An allegation I didn't mention in the previous section, due to it being the most irrelevant thing to come out about Ryan, was Noah Hugbox's statement. He was the first one to speak out about Ryan, with a twit longer called Game Over. I've talked about my many issues with this twit longer twice before, and to be fair, I am biased against Noah due to a lot of things I'm not going to mention here, but to sum up exactly why I had an issue with this statement, Noah didn't provide evidence for any of what he was talking about here. It's like he just expected people to take him at his word, and that's it. So with that in mind, it makes sense why the group didn't exactly take immediate action against Ryan. I'm not saying that Noah was exactly lying about what went on, but when you have absolutely nothing to back up what you're talking about, I don't think it should be just taken at face value. And again, it makes perfect sense why the group didn't distance themselves by this point. The same thing applies to the Peckett statement that we discussed earlier, although to a lesser extent considering what we know now. An interesting thing to note here, however, which I didn't touch on in my last section, is that at the end of Peckett's statement about Ryan, they claim that the Misfits were aware of some of the actions and chose to look the other way. But the problem with this is that Peckett never provided any evidence that any of the Misfits members knew about this stuff behind the scenes, let alone any evidence that Ryan was actually being predatory. So this does make me personally doubt that he knew as much as what people were letting on behind the scenes. But to give Peckett the benefit of the doubt here, since they were seemingly right about Ryan, and for the sake of the argument, let's just say that hypothetically, the Misfits members did in fact know about these allegations behind the scenes. Considering that there wasn't any proof at the time for what Ryan did that was just put out publicly, I think they probably just didn't have enough in order to feel like they had to distance themselves, so they didn't kick him out at the time, which honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think someone should be kicked from their position based solely off of an allegation that has nothing else backing it up, so if anything, I just see it as them being careful. You can call them negligent if you want, but to me, I don't think they did anything wrong here. Plus, again, everything here is a hypothetical. It is not confirmed to have happened. And lastly, I want to talk about the recent allegations against them at surface, the CoffeeZilla investigation, and the support that the Misfits members showed for the victims of everything. In October of 2023, multiple people came out with allegations against Ryan P, with the actual tweets being liked by members of the Misfits group, implying that they went their separate ways with Ryan and supported the victims. And this to me is one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they didn't just stay with him while knowing that he was some monster. And there's more than just this as well. When CoffeeZilla did his investigation into Ryan P, don't you think that he would have found out if the Misfits members knew what Ryan was up to but didn't say anything? Instead, he was seen nearly 2 months before his video even came out, thanking the Misfits members for being in support of the victims in a Twitter thread he made. So if he was talking behind the scenes with people involved and didn't feel the need to mention that people in the group might have been complicit in this whole thing, then there's likely a chance that they didn't know much at all. Now, of course, all of the things being alleged in this section are heavily based on my own speculations of what happened, based on what's publicly available. So take it with a grain of salt, and I will make a follow-up if anything new comes to light regarding what I just talked about, but for now, I think I'm done with this topic. Moving on. The story of Lunch Club is one of a group that seemed destined for great success on the platform, with many popular names making up the group like Call Me Carson, Slimesicle, J-Schlatt, and many others. It seemed like anything with failure would happen to them. They were a successful friend group that started a channel together, with videos that would get millions of views every time they uploaded, and people loved the dynamic of everyone involved. What could possibly go wrong? But this assumption about great success for the group would end up being completely wrong, all thanks to one controversy that happened in January of 2021. I'm sure most of you know which situation I'm talking about, especially if you watched my channel before, but to summarize it here, the leader of the group, Call Me Carson, had some serious allegations levied against him, and I say the word serious in quotes, as while it did affect his reputation and completely tanked his sub growth, what he actually did wasn't that bad, if bad at all. And thanks to these allegations, the group completely split apart, never to make content together again, which is around 2 years ago at this point. Since everything happened, the situation has always been interesting to me, as the stories from everyone involved about what happened have always been very inconsistent at best. So for this video, I'm gonna try and document the highs and lows of Lunch Club as a group, the controversies inside it, and for the final time, try to document what actually happened during the Carson situation and set the record straight. But before I get into this video, I want to give a quick disclaimer. Many of the things said in this video are completely alleged and aren't 100% confirmed, so take a lot of what's said here with a grain of salt, and try to form your own opinion about everything. I also want to say that you shouldn't wouldn't harass anyone that I mentioned in this video, even if they do some pretty dumb things. I know I've made fun of harassment disclaimers a lot in my previous videos, but with something as serious as this situation, I feel like it's necessary to say this, as this is a pretty controversial thing, and people get riled up easily when it comes to this topic. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. In order for me to properly explain the history of Lunch Club itself, I feel like I should give some context for how this online friend group started to gain traction in the first place. Let's go all the way back to May 3rd, 2018 for a second here. A video was uploaded by the YouTuber Call Me Carson called Changes. In this video, he explained that he was going to completely reboot his channel due to him not really enjoying making his current videos, and wanted to make something he could actually be proud of and get success from.
For a long time now, I've seen my channel as extremely mediocre. I know a lot of you really like what I make, but I do think it's time for a change. 1 week from now, I'm going to be doing a relaunch of this channel. It's gonna be sick. Now don't worry, the content on this channel is not getting a massive shift, but it is going to be made into something that I think people will like far better than what I'm currently making.
So he switched to doing Discord oriented content. These videos would include Carson's friends to them while they did something revolving around the internet in some way. This would include sometimes doing random stuff that Carson came up with for them to make, or just browsing the internet and laughing at the weird things they'd find, which is a massive formula for success at the time. The first video in his new series was DeviantArt is not safe, which has almost 7 million views today, and the success of these videos only snowballed from this point onwards, to the point where Carson was essentially given a YouTube career due to this. Carson went from around 12,000 subscribers in May of 2018 to about 1 million in less than a year, and he became one of the most beloved YouTube creators out there over time. And along with him, his friends started to get some notoriety as well. People like Slimesicle, TeadMemeFrog, Travis, and others would start to gain some popularity of their own, thanks to essentially being kickstarted by Carson himself. So as you could probably tell, the interest in this friend group and them interacting with each other only started to increase over time, which would only keep increasing once Carson's next project would go underway, SMP Live. In early 2019, Carson made a Discord server with him and his friends to play on, with the main condition that they all had to be streaming while they played the game. And like the Discord videos that Carson was doing before, this would kickstart his friend group into popularity again. Hell, SMP Live is sometimes even credited for the start of Minecraft survival and popularity. So to say that it was popular is underselling it a lot in my opinion. This Minecraft server led to the rise of other people that would become closely associated with Carson as well, such as JSchlatt, who would become one of the most popular content creators in the coming years. And with the popularity of this friend group continuously rising, there was this one growing thought. What if they started a group venture together? And that's what launched Lunch Club. Originally branded as Goop, but having to be relaunched with a different name due to copyright issues, the group consisted of 7 members: TeadMemeFrog, Carson, Slimesicle, JSchlatt, Travis, C-Scoop, and Hugbox. And all of them would appear together as a group in videos from then on. The group's channel started uploading in early 2020, and would upload 10 videos, just doing random stuff as a group. From the fans' perspective, it didn't look like anything was going wrong. A friend group made a successful channel where people were there that loved their personalities and senses of humor. What could go wrong here? But issues with the group channel venture started to appear, which I'll be talking about in my next segment. Moving on. Now, the 2 main sources that I was originally going to use for many of the things I'll be talking about in this section are Noah Hugbox and Josh, 2 people that were very closely affiliated with Carson, one of which was actually in Lunch Club himself. My plan for this section originally was that I was going to see where their stories line up, based off of an interview that Noah did, and a stream addressing things that Josh did a while back. But while researching to write this video, I watched a Noah Hugbox interview back, and while in fairness, I do have a slight bias against Noah, nothing of substance was really said about the whole Lunch Club situation itself. So for this section, I'm going to just mainly focus on what Josh said himself about Lunch Club and some of the internal issues inside the group, besides just Carson's allegations. Since Josh himself doesn't have much evidence for a lot of what he's saying, I would recommend taking this section with a grain of salt, but since he's one of the only people who have spoken up since 2021 and doesn't have a bad track record, I thought it would be interesting to cover what he had to say. So let's get into it. One of the first issues that Josh brought up was regarding who actually got into Lunch Club in the end. He said on stream that he, Altrive, and ItsCyclops all got cut from the group for essentially not being popular enough.
Me, Altrive, and Joko got blown off because we didn't have a big enough following. And so we got kicked.
And while I guess this makes sense from a numbers level, as the three of them weren't super popular then, if you look at it besides that perspective, it just seems strange to me. All three of them were actively in Carson's videos, even as far back as in 2018. And other people, including the already mentioned Noah Hugbox, weren't even popular for their personalities, and Noah especially was just known for gaming videos. So it doesn't really make sense to me how he got picked over the people who were actively in Carson's videos, and were closer friends to him. But out of everything he said, this was probably the most minor issue. Sure, being kicked from a group that you were hoping to be in does suck a good bit, but if anything, it's just a bit shitty, and that's about it. But there was more that Josh said that hinted at the group just being generally dysfunctional, even before Carson's allegations. One of the situations he mentioned, for example, is that Slimesicle, one of the YouTubers involved in Lunch Club, barely knew anyone else in the group aside from Carson at the time.
Charlie Slimesicle barely even knew anyone else. Like, that's how disconnected all this was.
Which is kind of weird to say the least, and it makes me wonder even more why Josh and others were kicked out. It seems like instead of finding who would make the best content together, they were just looking for people with larger sub counts, which ironically is one of the main reasons why Lunch Club failed. According to Josh, including instances like this, nobody talked to each other inside the group.
It was one of those, we don't talk to each other unless we're talking about Lunch Club kind of deals, you know? Like, literally, like, pure business relationship.
The main conversations were mainly about business, whether that would be about finances and who would get money in the group, or what videos they were going to make. But they never talked to each other personally, and that's obviously a huge problem if they're going to make a content group. To anyone looking on the outside, there might not have been any clear issues, but it's clear to me now after hearing this that the group was most likely destined to fail in the first place. The group definitely had the potential to make it far, and I doubt that anyone is going to deny that, but due to the poor handling of everything inside the group, including who was included in the first place, and nobody talking to each other, this just wasn't going to happen. Josh saying that Lunch Club was a disaster to begin with is absolutely true, and it is good to hear about what happened from his perspective. But after Lunch Club dissolved in early 2020, there was one more thing that happened that is kind of shady if I'm going to be honest. According to Josh, after the group dissolved, there were 2 unreleased videos that were made for the channel that were never supposed to go up, including Lunch Club Lost in LA and Lunch Club Goes Shopping. One of which is even an old video by admission, since in the description it says that it was filmed in late 2019.
Were there any videos that weren't posted? One of them wasn't supposed to go up. I think it was the like the Australian mall one. That wasn't supposed to go up, and the bar one wasn't supposed to go up. But someone decided to put it up anyway without telling anybody else. So
apparently, none of the former group members were notified that these videos were going to be put up in the first place, but somebody decided to just put them up for whatever reason. I just find this to be a bit strange, especially since this happened right after the group completely dissolved. If this is true, and it really was released without anyone in the group's permission, then that is pretty bad, but it isn't anything super major in the grand scheme of things. And the videos themselves don't put anyone involved in a bad light, so I don't have a huge issue with it personally. But most of you watching this have probably noticed that I've left out a major controversy, which was the one that broke up Lunch Club completely. I've said in this section that Lunch Club was doomed to fail essentially, but maybe it wouldn't have been like that. Maybe the group would have kept going. But in January 2021, allegations started to come out about Call Me Carson, and why Lunch Club actually ended started to become more clear as time went on. On January 4th, 2021, allegations began to surface about the YouTuber Call Me Carson, with the most severe and most talked about being that he had sexted minors and gotten news from them, with the main source for many of these things at the time being a Drama Alert interview with Noah Hugbox and Travis. But before we get into these allegations any further and see if any legitimacy lies within them, I feel like I should give sort of a timeline of events to when everything happened, and how it affected Lunch Club as a group. According to most of the people who came out about the situation and made a statement, Carson told everybody in Lunch Club in March of 2020 that he was sexting minors. That's the most consistent part of the story. Every single person agreed upon the fact that came out about the Carson situation, so we could say that this is most likely true. But that's pretty much the only consistent part of everyone's stories. Whenever it came to how much Carson had told everyone, Noah Hugbox, who spoke about this initially on a Drama Alert interview, claimed that he didn't know the ages of anyone who Carson was talking to, how long he had been speaking to them, or if he was still talking to anyone that was underage.
Did he tell you how old they were?
At the time, no.
But when people like Jay Schlatt came out about everything, he claimed that Carson had told him and the rest of Lunch Club that he had sexed a 19-year-old while he was 19, and that he was done with it and hadn't done it in months. Carson sexted a 17-year-old while 19, not a 19-year-old while 19. Sorry, I screwed up while reading my script.
Around late February, early March, Carson told the Lunch Club guys, as well as a bunch of close friends of his at the time, that he had been sexting his fans. He explained that he had exchanged photos with the 17-year-old while he was 19 and that he was done with it. He hadn't done it in months. He was ashamed of what he had done and all that stuff.
I'm not sure if either of these guys are telling the truth here or giving the full story. It's just the details of what they knew clashed so much, it does make me wonder what the actual truth of what Carson told them was. But what's pretty clear is that the situation is what completely ended Lunch Club as a brand if the timeline of events is correct. From what we know, Lunch Club most likely dissolved around March of 2020, around the time when Carson told everyone about his situation. And if you look at the upload dates of what was coming from the channels at the time, yeah, you could tell that something was off at the very least. On the Lunch Club podcast channel, the last episode that Carson appeared was on February 17th, 2020, and the last episode in general was uploaded in May of the same year. And on the main Lunch Club channel, every video that was meant to be uploaded also was published in May, with 2 outliers and videos that nobody was notified would come out in the first place. Hell, one of the videos was filmed a year before it was even uploaded. So if you take everything into account, yeah, it makes way more sense now. So after Lunch Club dissolved, nothing much had happened. Carson and some of the guys from the group were still making videos together, and everything seemed to be going well. Until January 4th, 2021, when a Drama Alert interview came out, which completely made the Carson situation public. This interview has been criticized multiple times, including by myself, but the one person that I see that's always getting the brunt of the criticism is Keemstar. But the thing is that Keem didn't even do a bad job interviewing. The problem was with Travis and Noah Hugbox, the 2 people that he had on for the interview. My main issue with the interview itself is the complete lack of information that they had about the Carson situation. Like I said before, neither Noah or Travis knew the ages of the girls that Carson was talking to, when he was talking to them, or if he had even stopped. And look, to give them the benefit of the doubt, Carson allegedly didn't tell them more about what happened, if we ignore what Jay Schlatt said. So there might not have been a way to get all this information at the time. But that doesn't excuse making the situation public like this. If he didn't have all the information, this should have just stayed a private situation. With making this public without having the proper information, this just caused way more questions than answers, and if anything, just made people confused. Keep in mind that all that was said at first was that Carson was sexing underage fans. For all the audience knows, that could be anything from a 2-year age gap to something way worse. So just putting this out there without even the bare minimum of information is pretty irresponsible to say the least. There should have been more care put into this. Luckily, there was someone that did come out about Carson and their experiences with him, and that was good. It actually gave some perspective to what Carson did. But there's one issue with this. The actual situation itself is a complete nothing burger. To give some context, a few hours after the Drama Alert interview, a tweet thread came out from an alleged victim of Carson, where she claimed that she was groomed by him. But here's the thing, the age gap was only 2 years. Carson himself was 19 and this girl was 17. So why exactly did this cause a big fuss? Don't get me wrong, manipulation is possible even with an age gap like this. I'm not denying that. But the victim of Carson did make a lot of their messages public in the thread. And in none of these did I see something that could qualify as manipulation. If anything, I just see Carson being pushy about sexual shit. You can have an issue with that if you want, be my guest, but calling him a groomer or predator because of this is pushing it majorly. To me, it seems like a guy who doesn't know how to talk to girls is being completely awkward with what he wants in Discord DMs. And that's it. I'm gonna try and be fair here though, because according to the information that is publicly available, this might have not been the only person that he messaged. After Carson got outed in early 2021, one of his former friends, ItsCyclops, came out with a tweet that had without a doubt evidence that at least the case we just talked about was true. And with that came the confirmation of a few other details that we didn't know fully beforehand, including the fact that Carson had gotten nudes from the victim. But the detail that's the most interesting to me was a message where Carson said that he had sexted a couple of viewers that were 17 when he was 19, implying that he did this multiple times. But even with that in mind and the nudes thing, I don't really have much of an issue with this, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, I do understand that Carson did something illegal with the whole nudes thing, and if I'm being honest, it was incredibly irresponsible for him to get these. But here's the thing, if we look at this morally, this is a guy getting nudes from a girl that was 2 years younger than him. I don't think taking a legal stance on this situation, when this will most likely never go to court, is exactly a good stance to take. So now that we've got some of the main arguments against Carson out of the way, what exactly is there left to say about him? Well, there's the power dynamic argument, which is honestly one of the stupidest things I've heard in a while, but let's try and seriously argue this for the sake of the video, because so many people seriously bring this up when it comes to Carson, to the point where it's become one of the main arguments against him. So let's get into it. The main reason why this argument is always brought up is because Carson was in a position of power, and him speaking to a fan in the way he did is irresponsible to say the least. But let me just say this, where where should we draw the line with fan interactions? Imagine if someone gets too famous, to the point where most people know them and are fans of them, and they want to start dating. Are they only supposed to go after other celebrities? Can they not just try and date a normal person that isn't popular? That just seems pretty weird to me. And plus, would the power dynamic even be discussed at all if, let's say, Carson was 20 and the girl was 18? No, probably not. It's only because the girl is a minor that this argument is even being brought up, and that's what I find to be pretty annoying about this situation. People don't understand nuance when covering this situation. The victim was a minor, sure, but when the entire thing was two people talking that had a 2-year age gap, does that fact really even matter? With what we know publicly, the Carson stuff is nothing but a nothing burger. Unless there is more that is released publicly with what he did, I can safely say that his career getting ruined because of this was completely unjustified. So now that we've got that established, I want to put my focus more on the other members of Lunch Club and how exactly they handled the situation. Moving on. After Carson got outed in January of 2021, several of his friends came out with statements on Twitter addressing the whole controversy. And with this section, I want to criticize these statements and many of the inconsistencies with them. Starting off with Slimesicle. In his statement about Carson, Slimesicle claimed that when he heard the news about Carson in 2020, he filed a tip to federal law enforcement about him, cut all ties with him, and withdrew from Lunch Club completely. He had also claimed that Carson told all of Lunch Club in a phone call that he had sexted a girl that he believed to be 17. That part about Carson saying the age of the girl lines up with what people like Schlatt had said about the situation, so we can assume that this part is probably true. But the part that I take issue with in particular is Slime claiming that he filed a tip with federal law enforcement about Carson. If this was true, and Slime had also completely cut ties with him and withdrew from Lunch Club, why would Slime still follow Carson on Twitter after he found out this stuff? Let alone this fact, why would he keep interacting with Carson after the fact on sites like Twitter, and even feature in videos of his afterwards? It just doesn't exactly make sense to me. Why would you continue to associate with someone publicly after filing a tip about them to law enforcement? I've heard the argument that maybe Slime didn't want to cause drama publicly, but here's the thing, he could have just said that he didn't want to be associated with Carson anymore or something along those lines, and stated that it was a private situation. It won't stop everyone from speculating, sure, but it's a better option than still interacting with someone like that who you claim you cut ties with. This entire thing is very strange to me, and Slime's statement only gave me way more questions than answers. And statements giving more questions than answers kind of became a theme when it came to Carson's friends responding to everything, especially with Jay Schlatt's response. A video simply titled Carson was uploaded to Jay Schlatt's weekly slap channel on January 6, 2021. And while the video starts off pretty clear, with Schlatt clearly stating what Carson had told him and everything that happened, the second half of the video starts to take a shift, and eventually I'm left asking more questions than anything. At first, Schlatt stated that Carson told everyone in Lunch Club that he had sexted a 17-year-old while he was 19, and explains why he stayed friends with him.
Around late February, early March, Carson told the Lunch Club guys, as well as a bunch of close friends of his at the time, that he had been sexting his fans. He explained that he had exchanged photos with a 17-year-old while he was 19, and that he was done with it. He hadn't done it in months. He was ashamed of what he had done, and all that stuff.
That part is pretty clear, and Schlatt explains himself well. But then in the second half of the video, he starts to get way more vague and says that after talking with some close friends at Carson, he wasn't improving where he should have been, which could literally mean anything.
But a few weeks ago, I started having some conversations with some of Carson's closest friends, including his former roommates. And in my discussions with them, I heard some things that suggested that Carson wasn't improving in the areas that he should have been. And he was showing signs of continuing some of his inappropriate behavior.
It's assumed by most people though, including myself, that he meant that Carson started doing these things again. I mean, why else would he say that Carson wasn't improving where he should have been? Especially since this video is addressing Carson allegations about him sexting minors? So this just leaves me with one simple question. Did Carson message more underage girls? And if so, why wasn't this explicitly stated to the public? If you want to fully spread awareness of Carson's allegations, wouldn't it be better if it was explicitly stated what exactly he did? It's not like anyone is exactly holding you back from discussing this. Noah Hugbox and Travis already opened the can of worms that was the situation to the public by mentioning it on Drama Alert. So why not just be honest with what happened? This vague shit makes zero sense to me, and only serves to confuse me more with what exactly happened. But the worst offender by far is Noah Hugbox, with him being the one that has said the most about Carson, with most of it not having much substance at all. I've already covered the Drama Alert interview in this video, and my issues with that, so we can skip past that for now. But let's get into what he said after the fact. For some context, Carson came back with a video called album Moving Forward in August of 2021, where he announced that for the next year, he was donating all of his profits to charity, to try and make his situation into something positive, which I honestly don't think is that bad. Noah disagreed with me, however. He made several tweets after this video, and it got to the point where one of Carson's former friends, Josh, had to tell him to stop, so that was kind of embarrassing. He also went on an interview around this time where he shared his side of the Carson situation. And while I do think it was interesting to hear his side of events, the interview didn't really add much to the Carson story in my opinion, besides him saying a clearly made up line about Carson calling him a Chad, which I found funny. But fast forward to a year after this when the Miskip situation was happening, and Noah decided to make a twit longer called Game Over, which, wouldn't you guess, is about the Carson situation once again. I covered this in detail in my last video about Carson if you want a breakdown of what was in that twit longer, but to sum it up quickly, Noah said a lot of unfounded things about Carson, his manager, and some of the people in Lunch Club that stayed friends with Carson after the fact. He also tried to relate the Miskip situation to the Carson one, which is just completely disingenuous if you know about both situations. And the worst part about it is, just like the interview he did, he had no evidence to back up anything that he was saying, which is why I've always had an issue with Noah's statements about the situation. But he didn't stop talking about Carson after this. Oh no. Carson made a tweet essentially responding to people calling him unfunny, which for some reason prompted Noah to respond with this tweet. I think it's fascinating you tried to fly a 14-year-old girl out of the house I lived in with you to take her virginity. This is something that Noah has straight up never mentioned before. He didn't mention it in the initial Drama Alert interview or when Carson came back. Hell, he didn't even mention this in his Game Over twit longer. This just came out of nowhere. And I'm going to be completely honest here. With how much he's opened his mouth about Carson, and how most of what he said has never been backed up with even a lick of evidence, I don't really trust what Noah says. Unless he could back up even a single statement with something that at the very least is credible, other than the fact that he used to know Carson, I don't think his words should be taken seriously at all by anyone. But that's pretty much it for this section. Moving on.